So much initially to like the Mindstone team for like setting this up. Really appreciate Josh and like this whole kind of community building AI in New York and helping it making more accessible. And thanks so much to the CIBC team, for kind of hosting this event. Really grateful. Essentially, my name's Anton Vidra. I'm the founder of an AI startup in New York called Anode, and I'm going to be giving a technical talk today about a topic called the human-centered AI. I'll skip all like the selling product stuff, but essentially to kind of picture this kind of use case, say you're like a financial enterprise, right? And you essentially have millions of rows of unstructured text data, and maybe you have all these documents. They could be 10Ks, 10Qs, earnings calls, and currently you might have a team of about 1,200 analysts that are kind of paid a lot of money and spend tons of time going through these documents. And you're looking into ways you can use generative AI or LLMs to kind of help answer questions or extract information from these documents. So initially, you might have a solution that might look a little bit like this, where, you have this chatbot and you upload your files, and you have these different chats, and maybe you ask questions on like all your documents, right? And you ask a question, maybe you get an answer, and you can kind of go and actually click on this like item to see like, okay, where would the answer come from, what the source would be, and you can kind of see it gives like a chunk of text and as well as like an answer. And you can kind of scroll down and you might see, hey, you ask it a question and it gives some silly answer that you don't really know too much about. The model doesn't really understand what it's doing. The chunks it might give on like the answer might not even be correct, right? So even if you wanted to use AI or LLMs to kind of go through these documents, it would be kind of difficult with just like a raw large language model. So from a technical perspective, there's this really open-ended question of how you can build these really accurate large language models that you can kind of input via like a fine-tuned model ID. And you can kind of actually get the right answers to questions as well as, the appropriate chunk of text. That way, your model at least gets more answers right and actually has some like relevant sources to back up where the answers came from. So I want to talk today about a proposed architecture of how you can kind of do this technically. Be happy to like answer any kind of questions on it and see if we have like time, we can kind of go into some like the technical details on how such a system could work. So essentially, fast forward to here, right? The idea is you want to input a fine-tuned model ID into your chatbot. So you upload your documents, you want to chat with them and get answers, and you want some way to like evaluate to see if the answer's right. Maybe it's private or public, maybe there's a software development kit that you can use to actually see how it works both with code if you're a developer. The question is, how do you do this fine-tuning, and how do you know the model is actually doing well? So to do the fine-tuning, there's different ways of doing fine-tuning. One is what I call like the most common. It's like you just have all these raw documents, maybe you're like 10Ks of the past from like a few years, and you don't really want to do any labeling, but you just want to feed this as like unsupervised learning into a model and use this kind of information via some sort of like masked language model to fine-tune large language models. The second is what I call supervised fine-tuning. So it's like, hey, you have labeled data, maybe it's like question, answer chunk, or maybe you're trying to have a fine-tuned model for classification, so it's like text and like category label. And you take this labeled data and you essentially use that labeled data to train or fine-tune a model that you can kind of put into the chatbot. And the third is this idea of like RLHF/RLAIF, where it's like maybe there's some sort of interface, and as you're actually labeling or annotating, the model is automatically kind of being fine-tuned, and you can put the model into the chatbot. So how would this kind of like fine-tuning system work? The general idea is you would kind of upload your documents you want to fine-tune stuff on. You might add the questions or categories you care about. And as you either label all your items or label actively or don't label anything, your model is kind of learning. And when you finish, you can kind of export that fine-tuned model as like an API endpoint into your chat. So from like a product perspective, it might look something like this where you can maybe you're trying to fine tune a model for like emotions, and you have these kind of categories. Maybe you had to define your questions or categories you care about. You can kind of see some items on a GUI, and maybe you make some labels. And as you would kind of make these labels, you know, your model is learning, and then you're using that to kind of predict or fine tune a large language model. And I guess before I kind of pause to answer any questions and go into details, I guess like why you might do this fine tuning is the idea is like when you finish, you'd be able to evaluate that my initial model answers, you know, are getting somewhere between 5 or 10% accuracy. But with this kind of fine tuning or retrieval, maybe you get like 20 to 25%, and then if you enhance RAG, maybe you can kind of get like somewhere between like 30% accuracy and improved accuracy on like the answer to the questions. Yeah, I guess I'll stop talking for now, and before I kind of get into any of the details, just want to take some time to like answer any kind of questions on anything covered thus far. Yeah.
Who's actually using at this moment? This
Yeah.
tool, yes.
So this would be like for like a financial enterprise like Morningstar, if you have like 1,200 like analysts going through like all these 10Ks or like annual reports, but you want to use like AI to answer those financial questions. Yeah.
Are you using a vectorized database?
Yeah, so that's like one way you can go about it, yeah.
But do you use a vectorized database for unstructured data? Which ones do you use, or do you one default set?
So I think it depends if the data is private or public. So sometimes like with like financial companies or enterprises, it's like the key thing is that the data needs to be like private on a device. And in that case, you can use like Chromo, or you can kind of just store things in like a local MySQL DB. And if like that's not a requirement, like it could be like public, then you might use like Pinecone or Weaviate or like one of those vector databases.
But it's configurable within your product, right?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I think like the question is not really like should you do it. It's like basically like how well can you actually, you know, do this kind of research. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, while I have like a few minutes, just want to talk a little bit about how to actually enhance these model performance to, you know, actually answer these questions right. So I think there's like a few things that are kind of worth like talking about from a technical perspective. So imagine like for instance you have this like query answer context database on like financial services, right? And you've kind of are trying to not only optimize the answer the model provides, but also the chunk. The first kind of thing you might want to do to make the model better is the process called like fine tuning. And within fine tuning, there's a technique called a parameter efficient fine tuning, which kind of uses like LoRa and QLoRa. And the idea is like you're taking this kind of domain knowledge from your training data set, you're doing supervised fine-tuning on some model, and you're kind of using that information to make predictions in a really fast but easy to use way on like your test data set. And there's basically also QLoRa, which kind of does this fine-tuning process, but like a lot faster and more quantized for efficiency. And why this is useful is like rather than use just kind of pure RAG, with this fine-tuned model, you're actually able to get like the answers to questions in like the finance domain more right, not like perfect. And the second kind of approach, which I think is like really interesting, is like, what if you're trying to do like pure RAG, but you're trying to like enhance the retrieval process. Essentially, there's a lot of approaches to actually improve RAG to enhance retrieval. These could be things that are solving like some of the core limitations, like, man, I have like 3 or 4 documents where the text is in different sections and I want to find the answer, or, you know, my model is taking the chunk but is not doing like the right chunk of text, or, you know, I'm getting an answer but it's picking the most similar chunk but not the most relevant chunk. So there's these approaches like query expansion, re-ranking, and metadata filtering that like could be interesting to look into. But yeah, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate you. And thanks to CLVC and Mindstone for like setting this up. Yeah.
Sorry, I have a question. you evaluate the results? Like, what's the benchmark? Like, how do you actually know that the results are coming back and they're true?
I would say this is actually like the most important question. So basically, it depends. If you have labeled structured data, so you have a human who's kind of went through and labeled, for this question, here's the answer I saw, and here's like the context or chunk I found, like something that might look like this data set, right? So humans kind of went through like a
And you
expert.
train in the model.
Yeah, and you can kind of compare the model answers to the human answers. And there's like these metrics like cosine similarity to measure string similarity, or Rogel score to measure like the longest common string, or you have a human measure it, but then I think most use cases in industry, you actually don't have this like label data from the human. So evaluation of these models is really difficult. There's metrics like RAGAS, which essentially measures like faithfulness of large language models. So it's like it's not only like how similar the answer is, but how like relevant, and there's like an algorithm for how to do that. And there's also like LLM eval, where you're basically asking GPT or your model to tell it if it's like good or bad. And that's like, I think, kind of subjective in like an open research area.
What do you feel is the most novel or differentiated about what you're doing compared to other things that are out there?
I think where we are at is we've kind of realized that there's a problem. It's like basically there's like a limitation of like what we can do, which is basically like for our customers, it's like, yeah, we can kind of get it from this like 5% to like 30%, where like most other folks are. But they want like 90 to 100%, and they're paying us for like the really accurate results. So we are trying to think of a solution of like how to actually do that.
It's like the race for quality kind of, and creative approaches to do that.
Yeah. So it's like, how do you build this really robust fine-tuning library? And we have like ideas, right? And we have like approaches, and I think our main kind of approach is like supervised, unsupervised fine-tuning with like labeling to learn to feed into the model. You can like evaluate and try different models, and like maybe you take different parts of the product and like chunk it to like filter your items before doing it. But I think we're still trying to like figure out how to make it the best, right?
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to get there? Like with 80, 90%?
I think it's technically possible if you had like a lot of resources and like a smart team. But I think it's definitely possible to do it at least incrementally better, for sure. Yeah.
So there's a use case within private equity or banking around looking at, like you said, 10Ks and 10Qs to figure out comparable companies. To like, let's say you're looking at a shipping company, and you wanted to go through these 10Ks and figure out what are other comparable companies, so that you can look at the PE ratio, for example. So would that be a use case that a node could be used for?
Exactly. Yeah. If like the product was like completely like amazing, right? Like that'd be like a use case where it's like if the answers to the questions and the sources were like completely accurate, it would just save a lot of time and money, and it would make a ton of sense, right?
Gotcha. Because it would give you prompts and ask you like, what category do you think if this falls in, and if you once you rate it, it'll over time get better.
Yeah. And you can either like label them all, you can not label any of them, or you can like actively improve the labels. And each approach is like good and works, and you can see how each one like performs, and you can like measure like based on your humans or based on your initial model how each one got like better or something. Like, yeah. Cool. But yeah, that's exactly. Anyways, I don't want to take up too much time, but really thankful for the opportunity. And I guess my name's Natan Vidra, so feel free to just like reach out to me and connect, and we can always talk more. Yeah.
Thank you.